So this is so good. I'm glad that you're actually coming on here because George and I are that perfect age gap in here where I still never left the 90s and George is always telling me how old I am in here. So I'm so glad you're on here because you can maybe be the happy medium or just agree with me that the 90s were better. So
I'll try. I'm a 90s guy too, just to be honest with you. I'm a 90s guy.
There we go, man.
All right, just to start it off then.
Go ahead. Yes, I've been waiting for this.
Your opinion on the skill level between the 90s and today's NBA?
Well, the reality is, G Mike, is you have to consider the era and the style of play of today. The three-point shot changed everything. And ironically, I was watching a documentary on Prime about the ABA and how it was the ABA that introduced the three-point shot. So I think what's happening is the comparison of the 90s players versus today. I think if you take those 90s players and put them in today's game, I think they would still just be as skilled. The athleticism might kind of lean more towards players today. But again, it's all about style. So I think you look at MJ, you look at Charles Barkley, all the players, GP, Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, like all those guys could get up and could do pretty much what the guys are doing today. Kyrie is a different animal. I don't think anybody's done what Kyrie can do. But yeah, I think the skill level, you have to consider the eras.
So my argument to it, right, it's more definitely 90s all-star players. I definitely agree they can play in today's NBA, right?
Yeah.
But in today's NBA, even the 15th man on the bench, I think will be a star in the 90s. In the 90s. Not a superstar, but like borderline all-star, maybe didn't get enough votes. Boom, they didn't get in.
All right, well, let me give you an example.
They have the
let's go with
stats.
Cameron Payne, who thinks that Cameron Payne thinks that he should be on every All-NBA team as it is. I don't think he could last in the 90s NBA or something like that. So, I mean, it depends on what guys you're talking about here, though, too.
Yeah, true. No, true. I'm just saying that there's more, in my opinion, there's more players in today's NBA that can play in the 90s than there is more 90s NBA players that can play in today's NBA.
Well, again, you have to consider the style of play, right? So in the 90s, I was a Sixers fan. I'm still a Sixers fan, unfortunately. We had guys like Mike Jaminski. We had guys like Jeff Ruland. We had guys like Kurt Nymphius, Bobby Thornton. I'm going old school on you guys. Because back then, centers, the expectation was back to the basket, right? Yeah. Feed the big man. That's not the game today. So had those players in terms of the pool of players today, could Jaminski play in today's game? Probably not, just because that wasn't his game. That wasn't his skill set. So it's hard to dismiss that fact.
Yeah, and I think another thing that comes up too, and you're talking about the old school stuff, and we're definitely going to move on to other stuff, whatever. But like, I like this, like kind of like your wheelhouse here. But I think it's like the hand check rules, and there's the rules are a little bit different now, So like, you could be a lot more physical back in the day, So it's hard to say what these guys could do. Like Harden back in the day probably would be all right, just because he would get I think Harden would have more of a difficult time because you could get hit. And I think that's a lot of what he's predicated on now is that you can't necessarily get hit, and it's more about the finesse style and the scoring, where back then you could hit somebody, and it's the be a man, get up kind of aspect,
Well, he shoots a lot of three-pointers. He's top 5 in history in three-pointers. So that means he would score way more back then than he would right now.
But I think he would get they wouldn't call the same foul.
Going to the line and what you're saying, driving to the basket. Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, because that's what he was doing a lot.
Right. So the jump step that he does and all that wouldn't survive necessarily as much as I don't think in like the 90s as it does in the 2000s.
Yeah, fact.
The 2000s also offered a more exciting product though as well. I mean, like you can say this. They showcase the athleticism of these guys a lot.
Oh yeah.
So